We are live. Phoebe Bain, welcome to the Powerhouse Women Show.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Well, I'm looking forward to talking with you because you cover a beat that is very near and dear to my heart and what we do at She Speaks day to day, which is in the creator and the influencer marketing space. But I also have just such an interest in what the role of being a writer and editor, like how you come up with the ideas for your story. So I have so many questions, but let's start with, can you talk about your current, a little bit about your current role and who you serve?
Yeah, so currently I'm a senior reporter at Ad Age. I actually just started there in December of this past year. So I've only been there for a couple months, but it's going really well. I am on their marketing team, like marketing journalism, obviously. So I'm still covering creator economy stuff, just like I did at my past role at Morning Brew, but I'm also kind of doubling down my focus on the direct to consumer beat. And then, just covering other things here and there, like telecom and health and wellness, just because obviously the health and wellness stuff has a lot to do with the creator economy and direct consumer brands. Many of them are health or wellness branded. So yeah, it's been really wonderful.
Well, yeah, and also a lot of brands, a lot of direct to consumer brands grew via influencers or people who might either were paid or unpaid who found the brands, started talking about them. So it's been a great way for those brands to grow their audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when I was getting started covering creator economy stuff at Morning Brew, there's usually fewer hoops to jump through when you're talking to somebody at, say, a 15-person brand or a smaller brand than, somewhere an enormous Fortune 500 company, right? Maybe they don't have a dedicated PR person and you're just emailing back and forth with the people that are actually managing the creators or the social media directly. So yeah, I developed those contacts that way just because it was sort of an easy sector to get started source building in, and it's evolved into it being one of my main beats.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the work that you did at Morning Brew. So you started the Marketing Brew Vertical for
Yes.
Morning Brew, if I got that correct.
Yes, yes.
So you saw that company, Morning Brew, quickly grow. So can you talk about how you enjoyed that environment, that startup environment, and the differences between being on a team there versus now at Ad Age, which is not a startup?
Yeah, so I loved it. I joined Morning Brew when there were about 30 people on the team, and it was incredible. I think because there was a path that was a little bit well trod for me to kind of come in and build the Marketing Brew newsletter. They had already built the Emerging Tech Brew newsletter and the Retail Brew newsletter. So, there had been some testing and learning with that format. But at the same time, I really got to feel like I was building something from the ground up. And the people there were just incredible. Josh Kaplan really was my right-hand man, sort of like project manager, Swiss Army knife type human in building the newsletter. And he was just really great at starting new products. He'd done it, helped with emerging tech and retail previously. And then Ryan Duffy, who ran the Emerging Tech Brew newsletter, and Haley Savage, who ran Retail Brew, were just incredible people to learn from in how to build a new product for a media company. So I loved it. It was exhilarating. I felt like they, although I was doing something new, they made me feel very supported and well equipped to do it. And it was just fun, right? It was, to be honest, just an incredible opportunity for my career. So yeah, it was great. I think there's a huge difference between being number 30 somewhere and being number 5 somewhere. I think a lot of the stress is sort of taken away, but the hours were startup intense. It was really 24/7, or I guess like 24/6. I had Saturdays off and I would just sleep all Saturday, but we sent a Monday newsletter. So I worked Sundays as well. But yeah, I mean, I loved what I was doing and I really, really believed in the mission of the company. So it felt like, it didn't feel like nothing, but I was happy to work the hours. Go ahead.
How did you get tapped to start the Marketing Brew Vertical?
That's a really good question. I haven't told this story a lot. So I was at Business Insider previously. It was one of the places that I had been before Morning Brew. And I was actually working on their social media edit desk. And way before, I guess like probably 6 months before, I was hired for the Marketing Brew role. Alex Lieberman reached out to me on LinkedIn. He was Morning Brew's CEO at the time and was like, hey, we're looking for somebody to run Morning Brew's socials. We don't really have anyone dedicated doing it right now. At the time, this was like maybe October 2019, November 2019. So I believe there were about 15 people. The Retail Brew newsletter was like just starting to roll out. And so, yeah, they were looking for someone to run their socials. Business Insider has a huge established social media team. So I think they wanted somebody that had done this for, a large digital media organization before that also still had some sort of a startup mentality at the time. Business Insider was not old then. I believe it was like 10 or 15 years old. So I went in, they interviewed for this social media role, and I did a presentation for them in their first office that, was outside of a WeWork. There were boxes, they were still moving in. And it went really well. And I walked out of the presentation just exhilarated because I was like, wow, these people are so cool. This company is so cool. I just knew it was a big opportunity, but I honestly didn't think that I was going to, knock it into the park with the social role. I really had just been accepting the social job at Business Insider as sort of a foot into the journalism world, but I always wanted to write. And I thought they needed somebody that was like a level above me, maybe somebody that had managed people before for this social role. So I, emailed them afterwards and I was like, I love you guys, but you need somebody that, has a little bit more experience for this. And I'm not, there was no offer on the table yet, but I was like, I'm going to pull out. And, they really just said, appreciate your candor. And Alex kind of was hopping back in my inbox occasionally after that, being like, are you sure? Are you sure? And then in April of 2020, or no, March 2020, it was March 13th, the pandemic hit. I'd been working at a different startup where I was the fifth employee super briefly, had left Business Insider to do that. And I got laid off because, pandemic, it was March 13th. And I think the first person that I reached out to, like before, my parents or my boyfriend or anyone like that was Alex. And I was like, hey, I'm pretty sure you filled the social role. I maintain what I said about that, but do you want anybody to come write for you? And he was like, well, we've been thinking about starting a marketing newsletter. And I, at the time, had been a freelance editor at Social Media Today. So really just writing about social media marketing news. And he was like, well, you do that. Do you think you could just expand it to all of the marketing industry? And I was like, well, yeah, I think I could. And because, social media at that point social media marketing was newer. I'd been at Industry Dive at Social Media Today since 2017 or 2018 doing that for them. So a lot of the people I was talking to had worked in many other parts of the marketing industry other than social previously. And we're really just like, the founders of like the social media marketing movement. So I was basically like, yeah, I think I could. And he said, great, I'll put you in charge or in contact with our head of content, the guy that was in charge of content at the time. And it went from there. So yeah, that's how it happened.
Wow. Well, and it also underscores the value of keeping in touch and even like you bowed out of an interview process and you did so gracefully, right? So that helps, right? With and I think it really does go to show that being transparent and just kind of saying, listen, I really loved meeting you guys, but I'm probably not the best fit for this, and kind of playing the longer game, like what a benefit that, and not that you necessarily intentionally said, oh, I'm going to play the long game here, but recognizing the value of that relationship and saying, I'm going to approach this as building a relationship.
Yeah. And also, it wasn't just me being graceful. It was like, I really, really like the people at this company. I really believe in what they're doing. And so if they're going to hire me, I want it to be for something that I kick ass at.
Yes. But that's so smart too. And a lot of what we try to cover on this is giving people kind of career tips. And I think that's a really important one to just kind of think about for a minute. It is the value of saying, well, this may not be the best role for me. And here's why, but I'm going to keep the relationship alive, keep it going, but also have in mind for something that would be a better fit moving down the road, because the door is not closed. Given how you move, like you pulled yourself out of the process, you kept the door open.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I learned that lesson again and again and again there. You just have to be honest with people in every work situation, pretty much. I don't believe in brutal honesty, but you have to have a conscience.
Absolutely. Well, and being transparent and but doing so, doing so in kind of a graceful way. I know I keep saying the word grace, but I do think there is a skill at doing that. So I want to talk a little bit, if we can, about just how do you get ideas for your stories? Like how does that come about?
People always ask me that and always ask journalists that on podcasts and stuff. And it's like they come from a million places, right? So, you know, I think that one place as a marketing and advertising reporter to get stories from is just things happening in culture, right?
Mhm.
I'm trying to think of like an example. Oh, I did a story at Marketing Brew about the wing. Do you know what that is?
Mhm. Oh, yes.
Oh yeah. But I had noticed obviously the news items during the whole like fall of the girl boss era about everything happening with their company. And so I kind of just kept an eye on them because they were in the cultural zeitgeist. And I ended up doing a story on the fact that they were hiring a new head of marketing and that they, in the job description, were looking for somebody with a master's degree after they had just come and they said like bachelor's degree required, master's degree preferred,
Mhm.
and they had just come out and talked about all of these diversity and inclusion commitments that they were making. And I was like, well, that's interesting, because if you look at the percentages of people who have these degrees in America, you're by requiring even a bachelor's degree, let alone a master's degree, which I think was just suggested, but was in the job description, you're ruling out a lot of really diverse candidates. So
Mm.
I ended up writing a story based on that, right? But that's because it was something happening in the culture. I think
Yeah.
following culture reporters and places like New York Magazine and the New Yorker, and sort of thinking like, oh, what's the marketing angle on that? Marketing and advertising is a huge part of culture, and so
Mhm.
that's inspired a lot of stories for me. But then PR people play a role. There's people that will pitch their company for a specific story, and I'll say, I'm not going to take your canned pitch necessarily, but this company sounds interesting. Let me do a call and learn
Mhm.
more about it. And maybe, down the
Mhm.
road, I think of it again or it comes up
Yep.
for a trend story or something like that.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, all kinds of places.
Yeah.
There's like no limit to where
Yeah.
inspiration for that stuff could come from.
Well, let me ask then too, just because I know you have focused on marketing, you're continuing to focus on marketing as you go along. What about the marketing space is intriguing to you?
It's a huge part of culture.
Mm.
So originally graduating college, I think I thought I was going to be a sex and relationships reporter or journalist.
Mm.
Like I wanted to go and work at Cosmopolitan, and I freelanced for them before under a pseudonym. I've freelanced and done personal essays for places like Elite Daily as well. But I just kept accepting the job that paid more money. So
Mm.
in college, there were two internships. One was at Social Media Today. The other was at a lifestyle blog. And the one that I ended up doubling down on was Social Media Today because they paid me. And so I kind of just kept making that choice throughout my career. And it ended up just being me sticking with business journalism.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think it's like the more, it's a place to make money and have a real career while still being able to do what I love, which is writing.
Yeah.
But also within business journalism, I definitely think the marketing and advertising space is the most interesting thing that I could be covering there, at
Mhm.
least to me, just because it's, everybody watches the Super Bowl commercials, right? There's this
Mhm.
relatability about it. And,
Mhm.
the idea that this business impacts culture in a lot of ways makes it interesting to me. Additionally, with the creator economy stuff, I've always cared about women. Again, I wanted to work somewhere like Cosmopolitan originally, and
Mhm.
I think that this is perhaps the largest bit of feminized labor in the marketing economy and
Mhm.
in the marketing industry. And so I think that has been what's kept me interested in the creator economy, is because you're basically just studying how women are making money against the odds.
You are so speaking my language. I can't even tell you. I mean, because this is the space that we work in. Like, right, we're in the influencer marketing, the creator space, and obviously focused on women. And I think that's one of the things that is so intriguing, and especially the pandemic. One of the things that we saw during the pandemic was that a lot of women who were creators and influencers actually were able to earn more income because budgets shifted. I know you know this, marketing budgets shifted, and there was a benefit to working with creators because not only could they give you access to audience, but they also were content creators. And you couldn't go do those expensive shoots. You couldn't go do the things that you normally did as a brand. So you leaned more heavily on your creators to give you content. And I think that's one of the best things that's come from the pandemic as it relates to female creators, is not only the access to their audience, because we've been in this space a long time. And when we started, we would get a lot of companies who would just say, here's our press release. Can you have the female influencers post these press releases? And we've really made a lot of progress since then. It's evolved. But the fact that they now can get paid for the value of the content, not just the access to the audience. I think that's one of the most amazing parts of what's come from the last few years. So I agree with you. The creator space for women has been a game changer and provided women with flexibility that they didn't have otherwise.
I was talking to somebody when I was down at South by Southwest last week, the week before, and they said that being a creator is the new American dream, which I think is a really complicated and interesting statement. But yeah, in a lot of ways, I think it's true.
Well, it's also, I mean, not to get totally off on a tangent here, but it's the number one job when you ask kids now, what do you want to do as a profession? It's pushed out the doctor, the lawyer, all of that stuff. And now people want to be creators. They want to be influencers because of what it can, with the flexibility and the creativity and all of it. There's so much in there. So I'd love to talk, if you can, just for a minute about what you see in the influencer marketing space. What trend do you think marketers should be paying attention to now?
Just how we value the content, right? I think that, last year and the year before that, influencer rates increased a lot. I think in part because of the pay transparency movement within the space. Companies like Clara and FYPM, really encouraged pay transparency and for creators to come and talk about, what brands are paying them. And I think, that pushed prices up. And now, obviously, with our economic situation in the US and a lot of different things going on, right? I think that brands are now trying to more accurately value what they pay creators. And so some, especially direct-to-consumer brands, they did a story on this recently, budgets are sort of, getting smaller. They're getting smaller across a lot of different parts of the marketing industry, right? But, as a huge reason why the creator economy had this boom is because it was really a good deal for marketers. But as creators have, pushed up these rates, a lot of times accurately, sometimes not accurately, budgets are adjusting, right? And so I think that just keeping an eye on how all that shifts is what I would be paying attention to if I were a marketer working in this space right now. I am just really curious as to when we will get the most accurate pricing model for this. And I think that people are now starting to come up with rate calculators. There's a company called #PayMe that has a calculator for brands and agencies are beginning to use it that can help figure out what you should be paying a given creator based on the scope of work and the creator's experience and their metrics, all that type of stuff. So the pricing part of it is by far the most interesting to me.
Yeah. And, it's interesting too, because that's one, I think that the influencer space, the creator space is one where collaboration with other influencers there's a huge payoff for that because articulating your value to be able to command rates that you believe you deserve is such an important part of it. But also the space is ever changing. The algorithms are ever changing. If you think about, just the fact that, that with Instagram, if you really want to have a good engagement rate on Instagram in today's environment, you need to be on Reels. If you're not on Reels on Instagram right now, and you want to have a good enough engagement rate that a brand's going to want to work with you, you have to be there. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is that influencers are finding the value in talking with one another and understanding, okay, what are you doing? Because it's changing all the time. As quickly as they get to a point where, okay, I got it now, it changes again.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's very fast moving, for sure.
All right. I want to take a step back quickly, if we can, to talk about you and how you got started. Did you always know you wanted to be a writer? I know you mentioned that when you were in college, you chose the internship that was going to pay you, which I totally understand that. Having done the college route myself and wanted to have some extra income. So, did you always know that this is what you wanted to do, or was there an evolution for you?
I mean, I'm a big fan of people doing what they're good at.
Mhm.
And so in school, just anything that was writing oriented was much more my strength than anything that was, math science oriented. I could do it,
Mhm.
but it
Mhm.
wasn't where I shone, I guess, where I shined.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I'm like acting like I'm good with words and I don't know the difference between shown and shine. But yeah, so it was always my strength. And, I transferred schools in college. So I started at
Oh,
Brandeis University
uh-huh.
in Boston, and then I transferred to William and Mary in Virginia. I'm from Virginia. It was just a better fit, but they're like similarly ranked colleges. I think like top
Mhm.
50 schools, and they were like at the time one ranking apart from one another. And so I was like, oh, like academically, this will be the same, right? No, William and Mary was so much more academically rigorous in my
Wow.
experience. And so I
Wow.
had to become an English major because it was what I was good at. And I was like, if I want to graduate from the school, I need to do what I'm good at. So then I was an English major. The path sort of seemed like go to law school or, become a journalist. And I was writing for a student publication at the time, and it was digital. It was called College Magazine. I started William and Mary's campus chapter of College Magazine, and I loved it. I was having so much fun with it. And I did the
Mhm.
math of what my return, when I would see the return on my investment for law school. If I
Mm.
wanted, if I was going to become the type of lawyer that I thought I wanted to become, which was not a corporate lawyer. I think I thought I was going to be like a human rights lawyer or an environmental
Mhm.
lawyer or something.
Mhm.
And I realized it would be like 20 plus years before I saw
Mm.
the return on my investment. And that was like really lowballing what a journalist's salary was. Cause I assumed, I think I just Googled like, what does a reporter make? And it was like $1. But still it was low, I remember. And I was like, okay,
Right.
well, if I'm not going to see the investment in 20 years, I might as well keep doing the thing that I feel like I'm decent at. And, and I already know I'm decent at. Who knew if I was going to be a good lawyer or not? I haven't taken the LSATs or anything at that point. That was early in college. So yeah, I was like, I might as well just keep doing this. Who knows if I'm going to be alive in 20 years, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that was the track. But I always knew I wanted to do something that involved writing as like a core skill.
What is if you had to say this is the most important skill that like you need, or the most important attribute you need to be a great reporter, what would that be?
So I think that there's two types of people in this industry. There's people that are great writers and there's people that are great reporters. And typically
Mm.
one of those skills is stronger than the other. I'm
Mhm.
definitely a much better writer than I am a reporter. My reporting muscle is something I've had to work really, really hard on building. And I'm not, many people are better at the reporting aspect of this job than I am. So yeah, you need to have one or the other come somewhat naturally to you. And then you can build on whatever your weaker side is.
How are you
Personally,
just sorry, I
go
was just
ahead.
gonna ask, how do you distinguish, just before you move on, like the what does it mean to be a reporter? I think I get the writing part. What does it mean to be a
A
reporter?
reporter is what you're doing right now. It's interviewing somebody and asking questions, right?
Yep. Yep.
And knowing how to sort of on your beat keep unspooling the same yarn and following the same story.
Mm.
So that's the reporting aspect. That's the talking to
Mhm.
people aspect, right? I talk a lot. I'm a much better, I'm not a great listener. That's a skill I can work on, and so I think that has been a big part of me building my reporting muscles, just learning when to shut up. But yeah, that's what I mean by the reporting aspect.
It's so interesting because as I hear you talking, just an observation is that you come across as someone who's very curious. And I think there is something there that if you're a curious person, you can become a much better listener. You know what I mean? Because you have an interest in understanding somebody's perspective. So maybe that's a muscle you can kind of really work to become better if you have the curiosity.
Yes, I think everyone is curious about the things that they are interested in, right? I think where it, you know, is ad tech necessarily one of my passions in life? No, it's not. That's not necessarily my beat. But at Marketing Brew, when I was starting it, I had to be interested in every part of the marketing industry. So learning how to make yourself curious about things that, really you could go your whole life without knowing about and feel okay on a personal level.
Yeah.
Learning how to make yourself curious about things is helpful. And I think that the way I've approached it is, if you're doing an interview, it's okay, this is a person sitting in front of you. I'm curious about human nature and about people. And if this is, if ad tech is how somebody spends 24 hours of their day, right, is doing that and learning about that, I'm at least curious about why. And I think I can build from there. But again, the reporting thing is something I'm really working on.
So if you think, one of the things that women tell us, because we talk with women all day long, that's kind of what we do. One of the things we hear is that women understand that self-awareness, kind of understanding what drives them and why, what they're doing and what they should be doing and reassessing is really important, but they struggle with it, like struggle to kind of know, like, why am I doing this thing? Why did I make that decision? Why am I in a bad mood today? Whatever it might be. And I'm curious if you can share any tips that you have for how women might be more purposeful in how they think about that self-awareness and decisions that they make, or just how you tap into your own self-awareness.
I honestly think I'm incredibly self-aware, but I don't think that absolves me of anything. Just because you know why you're doing something, or sort of like your own backstory and origin story, if that makes sense, doesn't mean that you're always going to do the right thing or be okay with the things you're doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But I think I'm incredibly self-aware, which maybe everybody does, right? Or we all live in ourselves. I don't know. That's a good question. Does everyone think they're self-aware?
No, I think that there's women worry that they don't know why they're doing certain things, why they made certain decisions. It's sort of the consciousness of it. I think it's the consciousness. And one of the reasons that when I talk to writers, they tell me that the act of writing for them is something that really helps them tap into what's going on. I had Candace Nelson on. She's a rock star entrepreneur, Sprinkles Cupcake founder.
Yeah.
I mean, just amazing. I know it sounds like you're nodding, so you know her. And she said something really interesting when I asked her that question. She said she frequently doesn't know what she's thinking till she writes it down. So she's like, going about her day and things are happening, but she doesn't really connect with it and become conscious as much until she writes it down. So I thought that was just an interesting thing. And I wondered if writers maybe have an advantage over some of the rest of us.
No, that's
that you're
not,
constantly writing things down.
That's definitely not how I became self-aware, I don't think. I learn by talking through things. But honestly, I think the reason that I consider myself a self-aware person is because both of my parents are very pro therapy. They got divorced when I was a kid, and like from a very young age, they were like, you're going to therapy, your parents are getting divorced. And I think that being in therapy since I was like 4 or 5, I think it's impossible to not be self-aware when you once a week for an hour are talking about yourself. Right. And having somebody reflect back on you. And, therapy is really like a self-work process. And so you sort of have to become self-aware to self-improve. But writing, I mean, I rarely journal. Like I used to journal all the time, like growing up and, in college, I used to do creative writing. I think that helped with self-awareness, but I rarely do it now. Now writing is just sort of a flow state that I get in for work. And I really enjoy it. The fact that something is so mentally stimulating and pleasurable for me and that I can get paid for that was like exactly my goal growing up. And I did that, which is great. But I definitely, I don't know if it makes me self-aware because I'm at this point very, very, very rarely writing about myself.
Yeah. So my last question for you, what do you wish you could tell your younger self as you were starting off on your journey?
I wish I had a little bit more confidence in the decisions that I was making. It all felt very make or break. But it's not. Like I was talking to a family friend and mentor the other day, and she was asking me, she has a wonderful high-powered job, and she was asking me if I ever got nervous at work. And she was like, I get really nervous at work. Do you get nervous at work? And I was like, no, because I feel like I've been doing this for long enough that I know that I can be okay with whatever decision I'm making. I no longer worry about whether something's the right decision. It's just the decision that you make. So I wish that had been drilled into me a little bit more when I was younger. And, you know, also like another thing is that I wish that I had told myself that it was okay to quit a job. There were many situations where I felt like I was a failure if I quit something, and you're not. If you are feeling the need to quit and not be somewhere anymore, that company is probably going to be much better served by you not being there. So you're not a failure; you're actually helping a business, and you know you're learning where you best fit and how you can better serve somebody else, right, with your unique talents and skills. So yeah, I wish I had known that it was okay to quit things earlier. I'm definitely a quitter. Like if something does not work, I will try, but I will quit. And I think that's okay. I wish quitting was more normalized.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the idea of like what's considered somebody might consider to be failure, right? And as women, I think we're so earnest. We want to be good. We want to get the good grades. We want to be successful and make everybody happy. But so I think that's why sometimes the idea that we're not like a job isn't serving us or we're not serving that job is a hard thing to come to terms with. But I mean, kudos for kind of recognizing that it hasn't taken you so long to recognize that.
Yeah.
It is something that frequently takes people a very long time.
I remember I had this one job that I was at in the past. Like everyone in my life had to tell me I didn't like it before I knew that I didn't like it, or like they had to tell me that like it was time for me to go. And
Right.
I just like refused to accept it, but I wish I had. And I think that if I had listened to myself a little bit more, I would have known.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you, Phoebe. This has been like, I learned so many things from our chat. I've written lots of notes, but thank you
Aw.
so much for spending this time with us today. I can't wait for people to hear our conversation and, see what you do next.
No, thank you so much. Really, it's such an honor to be invited here. I really appreciate it. Again, in such great company with your past guests. And I'm excited to continue listening and following along.
Thanks. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. You too. Thank you.